Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris Kulvukis. I'm the Protopsaltis at St. Demetrius Greek Orthodox Church in Seattle, Washington. And today we're going to be talking about first mode Eirmologic repertoire examples. So we're going to be focusing only on repertoire examples that come from the Vespers service. And we're going to be talking about just some of the stuff that we learned in the theory portion in the last video about Eirmologic first tone. So if you haven't watched that yet, go back and watch that before you look at this video. And we're going to also be learning about a new scale today that is incorporated into one of these examples that we're going to look at, the hard chromatic scale. So be on the lookout for that. And again, of course, before we get started with the lesson, if you're finding value in these lessons, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends that are trying to learn chant about this content so that we can get it out there. And of course, if you have any specific questions for me, you can go ahead and leave them in the comments. I appreciate those of you who have been commenting. And you can also hit me up on the email that's in the description or click on the link for a trial lesson if you want to do some one-on-one work with me. So all that being said, let's get started with the lesson. So, Kyrie Ekekraksa, this is the first hymn that we sing during a Vespers service. A normal Vespers service anyway. If we're not doing the Anixandaria, some fancy stuff like that, this is going to be the first hymn that you hear. So, we start here, we see the key signature, we see that it's first mode on Pa, to Savato Esperas, which just means Saturday Vespers, Ichos Protos, first tone. And you can find all of these in the Anastasi Matarion, which is, I'm going to make a video on different books that you should get when you're trying to learn how to chant. This is definitely one of them, but basically it contains all of the resurrectional Vespers and Orthodox music that we use in the 8-tone cycle. So let's get started with it. So we have Pa here, we're starting on Pa, and then we go up 4, right? So up 4 from Pa is Ke, Pa, Vuga, di Ke, up 4. So if we have the Apichima, Onanas, Ke, starting right here. And Kedidi, Kezo, Kediga, Diga, Gamu, Gadidi, Di Kediga, Gamu, Pam. And we see that Zo is flat, right? Because we hit it and then we're descending down from it. We're not moving up to Ni, we're moving down. So that attraction comes into play there where the Zo is going to be flat. And of course, they've helped you out by putting a flat on here, but you don't even need to have that flat there to know that Zo is going to be flat. Let's keep going. Pa, ke, once again up 4. Ke, di, li, Kezo, Kediga, Diga, Gabu, Gadidi, Kediga, Buga, Buga, Pa, Buga, Pa, 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 Buga, Diga, Buga, Di, Di, Ga, Gabu, Diga, Vu, Pa, Pa. So just remember, we have the Psifiston here. We had another Psifi. We had a few Psifiston in here, and just remember that, especially here in Eirmologic, that just means you're gonna give an extra emphasis to whatever character you have there with that Psifiston. And then here we have the Andikenoma with the Apli in the middle, right? So just remember that means we're going to do a light little wave with our voice. Vigambu papa vu vu papa. All right. Now let's check it out on the melos, on the words. Pa-ki, 2, 3. Kyrie ekekraksa proseisakuson mu, isakuson mu Kyrie, Kyrie ekekraksa proseisakuson mu, prosces symphony tis theiseos mu, ento kekrayenem proseisakuson mu Kyrie. And I'll just mention real quick that right now we're doing things at kind of a slow tempo just because y'all are learning and I'm trying to help you through it. But this is the Eirmologica, the Eirmologic melos, right? So remember, Eirmologic is syllabic, it's fast. And we usually do Eirmologic things at a pretty quick pace. So if we're going, oh, nones, a normal speed might be, Kyrie ekekraksa proseisakuson mu, isakuson mu Kyrie. So something more like that. Just so that you have that in mind, right? And the last thing I just want to say is I know we're doing all of this in Greek. I know that this is an English language learning channel for Byzantine music. But if you're going to take Byzantine music seriously, if it's something that you really want to learn, you've got to learn how to read Greek. You don't need necessarily to understand what you're saying here, even though, of course, that's the ideal. But you need to at least be able to read and pronounce all of these words, because so much of the material that we have is in Greek, especially the best learning materials. You really need to be able to read the Greek so that you can go through things like the Anastasimatarion, all right? So, all of that being said, let's move on. So this is the next hymn that we have after Kyrie Kekraksa during Vespers. And we ended on Pa in the last hymn, right? Pa, we got this Pa. And then, in our first character, we're going up 3. Pa vuga thee. And remember, thee is one of our dominant tones in first tone Eirmologic. So we're going to be moving around that quite a lot here, as you saw in Kyrie Kekraksa as well. Paralagi. Thee keni gagavu gadi Gadi keni gadi gagamu pa Nizo keni gabu gadi Gadi gabu pavu gadi Gadi gagabu digamu papa. So nothing crazy here. We just have, of course, our melody moving mostly around the, coming to our cadences on a pa here and here at the end. So our two dominant tones, right? The and pa, like we learned in our theory lesson. And then just here we have Nizo. And this is always flat, right? Because we're descending down. Other than that, fairly straightforward. Now let's hear it on melos. Onanes thee Κατευθυνθήτω η προσευχή μου, ως θυμίαμα enopion su, parsis ton chiron mu, thisia esperini, Isaacus mu Kyrie. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering why we have a "the" right here at the end, even though the melody ends on pa. Well, it's because, remember, as we learned in our theory lesson on Eirmologic first tone, when we are intoning in first tone, or when we are intoning psalm verses, we intone them on "the." So here's an example of a psalm verse that would go during Vespers right after this katevthin thito. We would say this psalm verse. Padi exagag ekphilakistim psychinmu. This first part is very free. Exagag ekphilakistim psychinmu. And here we have the martyria of thee. And we're back in rhythm. Dili gadi kezokedi gadi vuga gadi thee. And on melos. Tu exomologisaste tonomatisu. So all of this psalm verse together would be Exagag ekphilakistim psychinmu, tu exomologisaste tonomatisu. And you're ending on "the," which is why here we have this "the" before we move on to the next hymn, which starts with a down 3, the elafron with the apostrophos in the middle. So we're back on pa, starting on pa. Starting with paralagi. Here we go. Tu reni. Pa pa vu ga di ga mu ga di. Ke di ga di ke di ga bu pa. Vu ga di ke di ga mu pa vu ga di. So I'm just going to stop right here, because up until here we've had nothing too crazy. We're cadencing here on the "the" and in complete cadence, right? Medial cadence. And then we cadence here on the pa, our two dominant tones, as usual. And then when we get here, we've got this crazy symbol, the little squiggle with the circle in the middle. And you're probably thinking, wow, what does that mean? And you might have noticed that after that little symbol, I started singing in a different scale. Well, we're going to learn about that different scale today. So this scale is called the hard chromatic scale, or in Greek, the skliri chromatiki klimaka. So here we have two diagrams. We have the diagram of the diatonic scale, which we've used in plagal fourth tone, and now we're learning about in first tone. We use the diatonic scale as well. In first tone, we're starting on pa. With the hard chromatic scale, which is the diagram that we have on the right, we're also starting on pa, but the intervals change. So with the diatonic scale, we would have pa, onones, pa, bu, ga, di, ga, bu, pa, 10, 8, 12. Here with the hard chromatic scale, from pa to vu, instead of 10 moria, we have 6. So it's a smaller interval. Pa, vu, pa. And then between vu and the ga, we have 20 moria. So it's a gigantic, huge interval. Big jump. Pa, vu, ga, vu, pa. And then we have the up top, from a ga to the. It is only 4 moria, so it's a very small interval there. And when you put these diagrams together, you'll see that pa and the are both in the same place. We have 30 moria in between pa and the in both scales, but they're just divided up differently. So pa, the, pa will be the same in the two scales, but the intervals in between will be different. So once again, the diatonic scale, pa, bu, ga, di, ga, mu, pa, and the hard chromatic scale, pa, bu, ga, di, ga, mu, pa. So the vu is lower in the hard chromatic, and the ga is higher, to put it simply. And then you'll notice that in the upper tetrachord, just like in the diatonic scale, the hard chromatic scale repeats the tetrachord. Okay, so we have the same tetrachord in the high tetrachord, the same intervals as we do in the low tetrachord. So if we were singing the whole thing, pa vu ga di ke zo ni pa ni zo ke ni ga bu pa, pa vu ga di ke zo ni pa ni zo ke ni ga bu pa. So that's the hard chromatic scale. So when we're looking here, we see this symbol. Now this symbol is called a phthora. And what a phthora does is it tells us that we are changing a scale. It tells us what scale we're changing to. And it tells us what note of the scale we will be on. So here we have the hard chromatic phthora of pa. So what that means is that we're moving to the hard chromatic scale, and we are starting on pa of the hard chromatic scale. Pa. So fortunately, this lines up with the note that we are on in the diatonic scale when we're looking at this example here. If we're starting right here. Mugadi, mugadi, kedi gabu pa. You see on this pa, on this phthora, we're still on pa, and remember pa is the same in the hard chromatic and the diatonic. But now we move on. Pa mugadi. So as we ascend this lower tetrachord, we are using the hard chromatic intervals instead of the diatonic intervals because we've switched scales shown to us by this phthora of pa in the hard chromatic here. Pa mugadi. And then we have this guy. As John Boyer would call this, it's a kepsicle because it's like an upside down popsicle. That is the diatonic phthora of ke, a kepsicle. There you go. So with ke, now we are on ke, but we are back in the diatonic scale. So we're done with the hard chromatic. We're moving to the diatonic. Pa mugadi keni ni zo keni. So you'll notice that I was back in the diatonic scale as we moved on here. So basically, if you look in the grand scheme of this piece, this tiny little section here, we're just switching to hard chromatic for 1 second to kind of change the affect for a second. And just as a little side note, to get a little more nerdy about it, what is the reason that we are changing the affect there? Well, remember, in Byzantine music, it's all about the text. We are expressing the text here. Aphesin amartion is what we're saying here. Aphesin amartion. And especially this word, amartion, the Greek word amartia is meaning sin. So when we're talking about sin here, amartion, we are moving into this hard chromatic scale, which is a bit darker sounding, right? So we're painting the text here to kind of try and describe what we are talking about. And here we're talking about sin. It's a bit darker, right? So, once again, I'm going to start from here. We're going to go through this hard chromatic section, and then we're going to end it. Pa Mugadi, Mugadi, Kedi Gabu Pa Mugadi, Kedi Nizo Kedi, Ni Kedi Gadi Gabu Di Gabu Pa. So that's this one on Paralagi. Let's check out the melos. Ananes tas esperi nasimon evchas prostexe agie Kyrie ke paras huimin Afesin amartion otimonosi odixasen kosmotin anastasin. Beautiful little hymn here. So yeah, just to recap, right? Starting on Pa, we have a little incomplete cadence here on our dominant tone the, and then we have a complete cadence here on our Pa. Move into the hard chromatic here with the phthora of Pa in hard chromatic, and then we have the phthora of Ke in diatonic here, the diatonic phthora, where we move back to the diatonic scale and finish out the hymn with our final cadence on Pa. Again, we have this the here. It's just because of the screenshots that I'm taking of this book. I have to include them. But that, once again, is for the psalm verse that you would intone before the next hymn. All right? So, that's all we're going to talk about today. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate all of you who are taking the time to learn about this. Byzantine Chant. It's a beautiful art form, and it really just adds so much to the services of our church. So it's a wonderful thing to learn about. So thanks so much for taking the time. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.